There was a great king on earth who had a philosophy. Hakuna Matata. Roughly translated, it means no worries. That's my philosophy, too. Who gives a shit about a few measly mountains?
But
erase them. Bring in the talking rats to translate for the rat people. And we are giving all those beavers braces because they deserve it. Say it, Tick.
Hakuna Matata.
That's what I'm talking about.
And welcome back to Box Popcast, the weekly pseudo-academic pop culture analysis roundtable with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, but you can call me Mav, and I am once again here with my co-host, returning Hannah and Wayne. How's it going, guys?
Good.
No.
How are you?
I'm tired. It was a long show last week by myself. Well, not by myself. It was with lots of people, but that was a tiring, long show. And stressful, but fun. If you haven't listened to that show, go back and listen to the Your Black Friend is Tired show from last week, because I thought it was a really good conversation. But it was heavy and tiring and mentally and emotionally exhausting. So are we going to do something fun this week, I hope?
Sure.
We'll try.
What are we doing this week?
We're going to talk about minor characters.
Characters that dig stuff. Minors. That's got.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
I thought it was about underage characters.
We're also going to... okay. No. So I originally pitched this idea partially because I was working on a dissertation chapter about Charles Dickens, and he's famous for his minor characters, his unwieldy amount of minor characters. And I was thinking about how that shaped the plot. Don't worry, this is not an episode about Dickens. Don't tune out.
God bless us, everyone.
Okay. Tiny Tim. But part of the thing that's interesting is that a lot of people tend to think about the form of a piece of media connected to its main character. In fact, novel theorist George Lukács called something like the novel a biographical form, and you see this with things like Jane Eyre, David Copperfield, Emma by Jane Austen, and even more modern day stuff like Harry Potter, which we're just not going to talk about, and Artemis Fowl, which I guess we also are not going to talk about because.
Are you sad, Hannah?
Disney ruined my. Okay, they did not ruin my childhood, but they just. Oh my gosh! For context, the new Artemis Fowl movie was released on Disney Plus. It is so bad. It is the worst thing. Artemis Fowl was the books I read when I was a kid. My mom and I actually agreed on something, and we read them together. I guess we can talk about that next week because it's like fairy cops. But I was super into this series, and they took out the main character, who is actually a woman. Artemis Fowl is not actually the main character, in my opinion. And they took away her story, which was all about feminism and gender issues. And they made her story about her father, which is barely a story. And
was he a minor character? Because trying to get you back on track.
Her mother, sorry, her mother was actually her motivation in the book. It's fine. Whatever. Okay, I'm over it. Anyway, Artemis Fowl stupid, and we're talking about minor characters, which we can't do with Artemis Fowl because it's a bad example. And by that I mean movie. Don't watch it. Let it die.
Read the book.
Yeah, read the book. Then come back next week and we can talk about that. But yeah, Wayne, you can get us back on track about what we might want to talk about.
What are we talking about again? I had to introduce this idea, and I latched onto it. You introduced this a good while ago. We just get backed up with show ideas, and I just for my own self, my own psychology, I've always been someone I find myself more interested in a lot of the side characters in things I read or watch than I am the characters who are ostensibly the main characters. And I don't know why. But I find it fascinating. Here's the hero of something, but there are all the people around it who help make the story, who contribute to the story. And I find that really interesting that we don't focus on them in the narrative, but without them, the narrative wouldn't exist. And in the call for comments, I mentioned just some literary thing. Watson, with Sherlock Holmes. People talk about Sherlock Holmes. It's Sherlock Holmes, but it's Watson who tells all the stories. He's our window into that world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in many ways he is as much a main character as Holmes, but not perceived that way, I think, by a lot of people. I'd make the argument in Lord of the Rings that Sam is the main character, even though he's not the big hero. He doesn't get the focus. But I guess wanting to talk about why do we fall in love with these minor characters? What purpose do they serve narratively?
Mm-hmm.
What do they say about who we are as people? There's an old adage that we're all minor characters in other people's stories. And I think there's some truth to that as well. So maybe that's why we relate to them. Because we can relate to the minor characters better than we can the big hero.
And sometimes the minor characters take over, literally, like Urkel or Fonzie.
Well, we have to introduce our minor characters for this episode.
Oh yeah,
maybe they're the major characters.
We invited guest stars.
Yes,
I like to get that. So return. Yeah.
Well, also appearing on this week's episode.
And I think that both of them, I don't think either of you count as minor characters because you've both been here several times at this point. So returning to the show, we have both Meron and Nicole, two, I guess, long time guests. So, hey guys, welcome back.
Hey,
You glad to be here?
nice to be back.
Yeah, so you guys both seem to have some interest in this as well. For the listeners, you both have theater backgrounds as well. So I think that, which is not something any of us do primarily, but there's definitely there are no small parts, only small acts, kind of thing going on here
Yeah,
as well, I would assume.
Definitely. And I think when you're dealing with it from a theater perspective, if we're being textual before we get into production, I think one of the greatest examples of minor characters being brought to the forefront is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern from Hamlet, being the main characters of Tom Stoppard's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And the whole concept of that play that was shattering when it came out is that they would take the two least important characters in Shakespeare and bring them to the forefront, have Hamlet be the background character in his own story.
I saw the movie adaptation of that. I've never seen a live performance of it, but I like the movie a lot.
And there's a few versions of it, because there's a Strange Brew, is the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern set in a brewery in Canada. Like there's echoes of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and this concept of taking the main narrative and upending it and saying, okay, what if our perspective goes through these people, and then what's the reality of the narrative through them? Rosencrantz and Guildenstern also heavily influenced by Waiting for Godot. Their main characters, there's very few characters in that play, but those characters are not important, and yet they're given this massive focus. I think talking about theater production, the whole no small parts, only small actors, which is something you do to give something you say to early career actors to get them to do crap parts. could really get in trouble for that, but I stand by it. You have occasionally in large shows, you need fillers and you need extras. And I think there was an HBO show about extras. And you have people who are there as actors, as characters to support the world, the main narrative. And that's something that you can't, as was said earlier, main narrative would fall apart without them. But it's a pretty big discussion. I don't want to monopolize.
I mean, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern also, heavily inspired Timon and Pumbaa from Lion King.
Right.
And I think that they're interesting, the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the Timon and Pumbaa, and then even like the Fonzie and the Urkel, in all those cases, I think there's two things that we can talk about. There's the minor characters that become the main character that are fascinating enough that they sort of take over the narrative. I mean, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead it's not just these characters are important. It's these characters have a whole story of their own, and let's explore that. And it's this whole story. And then there's other, in Shakespeare in Love, Judi Dench she's nominated for an Oscar for the shortest amount of screen time ever. Like she's in like 7 minutes in the movie or something like that. And got a best supporting actress. She won. I think she was just nominated. She might have won. I don't know. But like things like that, people who are so important to the piece that they really are part of the story.
Is the most in Game of Thrones, Rio Farrell, like probably one of the best characters of the whole series. And he's in a few episodes of season 1 and a few scenes of the first book. We never see him again. And there were fan theories of trying to keep him alive.
Yeah, of who he was or might have been. Yeah.
I like to say Lady Mormont, who is the most important character in that
Yeah.
entire series.
Which, actually, like the way Game of Thrones, the show was sold originally, I recall, was after the quote unquote big twist of Ned Stark being beheaded. Is like, well, your protagonist is gone. What happens? Which I think is probably an unfair characterization of what George R. R. Martin is trying to do. But, that was an interesting concept where even like shows like Lost, which expanded its cast and made a lot of minor characters major by telling their backstories, that show still focused on Jack. And he was like the thing that anchored that show.
Yeah.
And if you're dealing with things like live entertainment, minor characters are still expensive. Those costumes aren't cheap. Screen time isn't cheap. Moving a camera is half a day of union labor. And, like, where characterization fits in larger storytelling starts to be really important. And I think we're coming to a place because of long form storytelling. Long form storytelling, I think the two mediums that do it the best are bingeable television and comic books. And when it's bingeable television, you have the opportunity to bring people back, or opportunity for people to become important, and someone who the costume fits them. We found out that they're good to work with. And
okay, wouldn't you say though that television, like bingeable serialized television and comic books, are really, and this is my Victorianist showing, like they're all like kind of like aberrations of the serial novel form that originated in the 18th and 19th century, which, like Samuel Richardson wrote the longest novel in the history of the English language, Clarissa, which I have not read and I will not read because I don't have to. But, like Dickens, if you try and adapt like Little Dorrit, 800-page Little Dorrit, it does not work as a movie. The miniseries starring Claire Foy and Matthew McFadden, like does work because it's a TV show that mirrors the novel and can capture like all like 50 minor characters, perhaps in a more abbreviated form than the novel. But it like you can't do Dickens's urban network city without those players bumping into each other and colliding and reacting.
I agree with you. I agree with you, but I think this actually goes back to the first episode of this I was ever on with Nicole. I think it goes before the Victorians. I think it gets into the Greeks. I think if you start looking at the dramatizations of the Iliad and you start seeing stories of the Iliad being told long form and in repetition and in different versions of the same thing, where people walk in knowing the larger narrative that we're in and knowing this is a piece of story of the Trojan War. When we get into the novel, and Moll Flanders was something that was kind of an accident of, we had the printing, I'm stepping into your period, so correct me when I get these things wrong, because I'm primarily a theater historian. You have enough of a literate population with enough leisure time, and you have mass printing. And then that gives you the ingredients of long form written narrative meant to be read as an individual. The long form story with the repeat within the serial form began with the Greeks, and I think is in its golden age today. Because today we have the ability to go longer. We have the ability to go in more depth. We have companies that this is a little yay capitalism. You have situations where story could be funded in a really massive way that has no precedent.
Yeah, persistent storage.
Right. Like, I mean, like we wouldn't have seen His Dark Materials miniseries even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
There was the movie and it was also horrible.
Yeah. But like a mini, like, the amount of like money now being willing to like be invested in like prestige, even like fantasy, big budget TV.
I think also with serialized TV, and I think this is true in comics as well, that long form, and this ties into the Oracle Fonzie phenomena as well, is characters have a chance to develop. Characters who weren't planned to be a main focus, but as time goes on, the audience responds to them, or the writers find new potential in them in ways that you wouldn't if just here's a movie, here's a novel. I mean, certainly in novels, writers find that characters just step up and speak. I've had that happen myself. Characters who meant to play a secondary role just force their way into the narrative. I was thinking Sons of Anarchy is a series I watched, and that was a case of the character Chips, who is, I'm blanking on the actor's name, Irish actor, which I'll come up with before this is over. Tommy Flanagan. That was a case of he was a random member of the motorcycle gang in the first season. He was there. He had some lines. By the end of the final season, he was one of the main surviving characters. And reading backstory on that, part of that just boiled down to he and Charlie Hunnam, the main character, developed this tremendous friendship off screen.
Mm-hmm.
And their chemistry translated on screen. So he just got more and more parts as he became friends with Charlie Hunnam.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I don't think that was planned for his character initially at all, but we saw a very natural growth that wouldn't have happened had that been a movie or a single season or something like that.
I just, because we're all coming out of the first wave of a pandemic, we've all just done a lot of binging.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Are we coming out of it? Sorry.
Hope so. Hope so. I mean, New York is better than it was.
You're lucky.
New York is still a shit show. But like, I'm not hearing 24/7 sirens anymore. So the sirens are not interrupting my binging. I watched all of Banshee, and are you guys familiar?
I've not watched it. I am familiar with it.
You must.
Okay.
It is so good. And it is completely so. The friends who recommended this, he described it to me as deep and dark, and complex, and all of the sex and violence was written by a 14-year-old boy.
That sounds like my first novel.
And it is like insanely good and complex, and people have these amazing backstories, and there's this intricacy in the storytelling. And then, like, because it was a Cinemax show, lots of random sex. The violence, I can tell you, like, as a fight choreographer, looks like they gave their stunt and fight team an unlimited budget and told, do whatever the hell you want. Ooh. But there's characters, it goes 4 seasons. Mm-hmm. There's characters who become massively important, look like in the first few episodes or the first season or two, you look like they're part of the background. Mm-hmm. Look like part of the background. They have nothing really going on. They seem like just good, stable people in the town. And then suddenly they're the main love interest of the main character.
Do you know if it was planned or not? Or do you not know?
I don't know yet. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of research.
Because my example, so Banshee, if I haven't watched it, I'm familiar with it. Banshee it exists in this weird time period when Cinemax the company externally they were still trying to hang on to their sort of reputation as where the network was sex, which wasn't doing so well anymore because people had the internet now and you can just get sex whenever you want. So they were hanging on to that, but they were also trying to enter the prestige format, like world, but like then HBO, the main channel was like, no, we're just going to make Game of Thrones. We can do this. And so they've eventually given that up. But the one that I always point to where it was not planned was the reboot of Battlestar Galactica. And in particular, several characters, the most important of which is Kaylee, but all of the random, like Kaylee and several other members of the mechanic crew in the hangar. Mm-hmm. The only person who was cast as the main cast in that in the original miniseries was Aaron Douglas, who plays Chief Tyrell, who, by the way, is a really nice guy. I've met him at comic book convention. He's awesome. But anyway, Aaron Douglas, he's, they first or second day of filming, since he is the only principal cast member talking to these guys, everybody else he sees everybody else as they're getting in their ship, but for all the people around him are just extras. They just hired a bunch of extras and their names in the script were Mechanic 1, Mechanic 2, Mechanic 3, Mechanic 4. And so Douglas decides he just changed all of his lines. So when they were filming, he would sit there and he because he was hanging out with extras and he'd have lunch with them and everything because he wasn't with the main cast. So he gave every character on the deck, on the flight deck, he gave them all names. And he's just, so anytime he had to refer to somebody, instead of saying, give me a wrench, he'd say, Kaylee, give me a wrench. and he did it consistently, and he said their name on every single take, realizing that if he did that, it would become part of the show, and the casting directors would be forced to hire the same actors back to be extras, because for continuity, he just forced them. He's like, they had no takes where he didn't use their name. So
amazing. I'm so glad he got away with that.
Yeah. And that's the story. So he eventually, he gets like basically these 5 or 6 extras to get work, and then as the series went on, they just gave them more and more to do, because they were there, and that's how they all became parts of the show. The other character on that show is Hilo, who becomes one of the main characters, and he's in the miniseries. He is Boomer's partner when they're trying to escape from Caprica, because the rest of the ship is already there, and at the very end of the miniseries, he sacrifices himself so that she can get away, and then the regular series starts, and he's not on the first episode or two, and people start writing in, and they're like, so what happened to Hilo? And the producers are like, what do you mean what happened to Hilo? He sacrificed himself. And they're like, no, he just said, he's still on the planet. He helped her get away, but didn't get back to the ship. And they're like, oh. So then they had to go and find the actor. They had to hire him back. So if you actually watch for the first 5 or 6 episodes of Galactica, where once he starts appearing again, he's not interacting with anybody else of any consequence, because they're all elsewhere, and those scenes were all shot later and just sort of inserted in, because so you've got these scenes where it's like, meanwhile on Cylon occupied Caprica, and it's just Hilo running through the jungle, right? just to give him something to do.
And well, I think a lot of times with minor characters, I want to talk about comics, because I think that's where we want to go. I was thinking when I saw this call, 2 things I thought of were Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, and Rocket Raccoon.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
And Rocket Raccoon, back in the day, was this joke of a character who showed up in a couple things.
If
you only knew who he was if you read the Marvel Universe Encyclopedia.
Yeah, if you had told me 30 years ago that Rocket Raccoon would make it to the big screen before Wonder Woman, I would have just laughed. Yeah, I mean, he appeared in an issue of the Hulk that, just for the record, nobody gave a shit about until the movie, and now it sells for crazy money. Mm-hmm. There was a 4-issue miniseries drawn by Mike Mignola of Hellboy fame. Mm-hmm. That was a lot of fun, and it's Mike Mignola, so how bad can it be? But yeah, nobody gave any thought to that character as anything serious.
What I think, like, my theory of this, and I'm in a chat of literature scholars, so help me here, is that we like characters because of personality that's layered on them. And with something like comic books, you can take Rocket Raccoon, was this unknown factor, and then bring it back and say, this is the personality.
Yeah.
There's an alternate universe where Spider-Man's really boring.
Yeah, well, and which they did in the comics. That wasn't introduced in the movie. They brought Guardians of the Galaxy back as a ongoing series. Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning were writing it, and they're the ones who brought Rocket Raccoon in. And personality we see in the movie is really based on what they established in that comics run. They're also the ones who brought Groot in. I mean, Groot was a giant monster from bad guy from one issue of Amazing
the Mystery
Journey
Unknown.
One of those giant monster books that Marvel was doing in the late 50s. And I think he had one random appearance in a Hulk annual after that. And that was it. And they bring these characters in. That phenomenon, I think that's part of my draw to secondary characters or tertiary characters is you can bring in someone like Rocket Raccoon, just to stay with that one, and nobody knows anything about them. And as a writer, you can do anything at that point. There's for as many different versions of Batman as there are, if you're signed to write Batman, there's certain parameters that you're limited by. If you're Grant Morrison and you decide, hey, I'm going to pitch an Animal Man series because nobody's read this character since 1963, you can suddenly do something that no one's ever thought of before.
I think that's what does it, because when we lose interest in characters is when they start acting out of character. Because I think of season 4 of Community or like season 4 of The Boondocks, when you're watching characters that you feel they're not acting like themselves, and it's upsetting.
Yeah.
I definitely have never expressed any thoughts about that ever before. I definitely did not just go on a rant about how I recognize any of those characters in a certain movie on Disney Plus.
Like, that's the thing, and like that's why I completely agree with you. You can't, if you're taking Rocket Raccoon back when it was a trivia character, you can't ruin the raccoon. No, you can't.
Yeah.
You could totally fuck up Artemis Fowl. It sounds like they did, and I'm going to be sparing myself that.
The only thing they kept from the book was a couple of out of context lines that therefore had no meaning. And if you read the books, you know that dwarves can unhinge their jaw to do like through dirt, and then they like basically just fart it out. That is the thing they kept. So there's these really disturbing shots of Josh Gad, who plays a giant dwarf, unhinging his jaw. And anyway, not the point of this episode, but but actually, if you want to talk about,
thank you for that image.
you want to talk about minor characters made major.
I love the book as well.
Can't sleep. Josh Gad will eat me.
But minor characters, because they can be minor characters become major characters, and someone gives them a personality and brings them to the forefront. And they can
we have an alternate universe where the Guardians of the Galaxy movie stars Spragg the Living Hill.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I think you have a point though about the characters. We're layering on a part of us that, what do I want? That's not my Superman. That's not my Doctor Who. That's not my Batman. That's not my, like that. You're layering on what you want this character to be, and the less of them there is, the more you can do with it, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I mean,
you're not going against the archetype.
Right.
Yeah.
At this point, Batman's an archetype. And like the biggest departure from archetype in Batman is the 60s series. And that's kind of its own thing. Where if you're going to try to do a happy, friendly, fluffy Batman, it's not going to work. If you're going to try to do a happy, friendly, fluffy minor character from DC that, I'm having trouble thinking of because I don't have anything in front of me.
Dumb Bunny from Inferior 5.
Or like, if you try to do a series of destruction from Sandman, you've seen so little of him that can make him anything.
Well,
we just know he's kind of a happy giant.
Well, there was the Sandman Presents series that were all, here's really minor characters from the Sandman mythos. Let's do a 3-issue miniseries on them. The Dead Boy Detectives. Like that. They were capitalizing on the brand of Sandman, obviously. But still, it was this potential for these characters to rise and then be more than what they were originally intended to be.
Like all of Lucifer.
Yeah, all of Lucifer. Yeah, Lucifer became a main character, and then suddenly.
Well, I mean, even to take Sandman, that's a comic, but it's also something. It's not a superhero comic; it's a little different. But arguably, the most popular character from Sandman is Death, and that's how she started.
Yeah,
she's not the major character. I mean, she eventually is, and I mean, I still maintain that the best Sandman book he's not in, Death: High Cost of Living, is the best thing from that entire part. But same thing, she is a minor character that becomes something more.
Well, so then I guess we have to ask, what is it about those particular minor characters that become that lead to that? I mean, there's the minor characters who are just there for fun, that are memorable, that don't necessarily develop. But then, like you're saying, we have these other characters who become so major. So what is it about those? Or do they have something that the main characters don't? Right?
Yeah, what are they providing?
Right.
Like, why are we drawn to them?
Well,
what did Fonzie bring to Happy Days that made him
That's
the Fonz?
That's exactly what I was
actually,
ask.
I think that actually, like Fonzie, Urkel, and some of those characters that are memorable that don't get developed, like I don't know, and I'm sorry for this, 19th reference, but like someone like Miss Bates, or one of like the minor characters in Jane Austen, or one of the minor characters in Dickens, they all have like little ticks where you recognize them, or they're good on the side. But did Fonzie and Urkel like actually translate well once they became major characters, or did they become stuck in their archetype?
I think eventually they did. Yeah, eventually they did. Absolutely.
When they did, they lose what drew us to into the beginning.
Yeah.
The about Fonzie was magic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he wasn't at first though. Like when he first appears, he's not. When he first appears, and I think that's kind of one of the things that happens though, because he becomes magic, and Urkel becomes like this genius. But like originally, both of them are intentionally one note filler characters.
Like Mark?
Fonzie isn't.
Yeah.
Well, but Mork was brought in to be the star of his own spinoff. I mean, that was intentional. But like Fonzie was brought in because he was a cheap parody of Brando, like he was a Brando / James Dean type.
Yeah.
And that there was no thought put into him.
Yeah, he was meant to represent the cliche. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, he just kind of, people hung on to him. But then he becomes, like Meron was saying, he becomes this magical being who can snap his fingers and turn on a jukebox or make women fall in love with him or fix eventually anything. Like
jump a shark.
Yeah, jump a shark. Yeah. Literally jump a shark.
Nicole, were you going to say something?
Oh, the characters that sprung to my mind, I think it sort of reminds me of characters that are brought in to do a small arc, but then prove so wildly popular that they stay, right? Like Tara Duffy, right? But then you also have characters who they keep coming back. I'm thinking of Leverage. Watch Leverage when it was on?
No.
If you're a gamer nerd, it's a fabulous show because it's basically like a D&D. Each person has their own class, right? Their specialty, and we band together to go complete these adventures, right? Anyway, they're criminals-ish. Robin Hood, minor. But there are these two FBI agents who they just were they were so funny the first time that they kept bringing them back just occasionally. I mean, I want to say maybe like once a season, not a whole lot, but it was just, and so you'd see these characters, you'd be like, oh my God, it's Taggart and McSweeten, yay, right? Or there's a book series that I read called Dresden, and we're finally getting another one this summer after 6 years. But there was a character that was introduced in I think it was book 4 or book 5, who slowly now eventually has become a really important character. And I mean, to the point where there are T-shirts with his catchphrase on it. I mean, that everybody loves Butters now. And it's like, what is it about him? And I think it's because he's the first time he'd be really integral to the story. He is scared to death, and he's honest about it, and he has trouble grappling with everything that's going on. So he's the reader identification character. Like, how would we react if we were suddenly in this situation? Right? Anyway, I don't really have a point. I don't know if anybody else has.
You bring an interesting point because I think there's different ways in which minor characters become major in novels, television, and comics. And what I'm seeing with comics is minor character becomes a major character when a writer, some clout, has an idea and is allowed to explore it.
Yeah.
And there's a million examples. Adam Warlock started as a very minor character, got his own series, was a cult favorite, became the center of the Infinity shebang, and then they took the character way off course.
Oh, yes. X-Men was that. They were the least well-known Marvel superheroes when they did the new X-Men.
And then there was a while where there was more X-Men books published in all of DC.
Yeah.
But when I think in television, part of a minor character becoming a major character is to be about the charisma of a specific actor in the role and how well they work with everyone.
I find myself getting attached to minor characters on TV and in comics, and I find myself wanting to know more about them, and then getting angry or upset when that doesn't happen for whatever reason.
Well, sometimes it goes wrong.
Yeah, here's this character that I want more of. The example I gave in the call for comments, I've been watching Westworld, and there's the character of Clementine who's been there from season 1, and just something about her demeanor, whatever, and backstory that they've created for this. I'm interested. I want to see more. And this most recent season, she's not there. And then there's the episode where she and this other character are brought back. I'm all excited. And she has a really violent 5-minute fight scene, and then is never mentioned again. It's like, what was the bloody point other than you want to give this actress a few bucks?
When you get into anything on television, sometimes it's just someone's schedule didn't work.
Right.
And this could very well be a matter of they planned more for her and it ended up on the cutting room floor for whatever reason. And everybody's like, after we have 6 episodes and she's not there, I just like, oh, okay, they're not dealing with that character. Fine. She's not the only one who's been written out. And they bring her in and it's like, oh, yay, she's back. Oh, she's gone again. Okay.
Or sometimes it comes down to the editing. It comes down like I did a film once where they brought me in to choreograph a day of fight scene. I was paid very well for that day. And I worked the entire day. Then when the short came out, my work was in 2 seconds of a 6-minute short. I probably filmed a good, a day of film. If in a day of filming a fight scene, you get minutes of fight, that's really good. And I had over that much. So what they decided in the end was we're going to do is like the thing that I saw that after the final editing had very little in common with the script I read.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many factors. There's so many. I know like every actor will tell you about the amazing scene they did that was taken out in editing.
Yeah.
The whole thing sort of makes me laugh because you never know too sometimes what's going to happen with the comics, that the thing that you thought wasn't a big deal then later does. At the Pop Culture Association, I'm chair for the comics area. And years ago, I want to say it was in maybe 2006 or 7. I'd have to look. We were joking around at one conference and we came up with this ridiculous thing. We were going to do a satire panel and we called it the Institute for Korvac Studies. And the whole thing became
I knew where the story was going.
And the comics people know what that means.
And so the whole thing was about how Korvac was really the center of the Marvel universe and deserved all this study. And we would make up these ridiculous paper titles like, Thor's hammer, Cap's shield, and and Wonder Man's safari jacket, 3 studies in overcompensation, or things like this. And we created a fake award that we would give to someone. They didn't know it was coming. We would make up a paper title for them. And then they had to give a paper at the satire panel the next year. Right?
That's amazing.
And so the whole thing was
great.
just this big joke, right? About how kind of poking fun at ourselves that we focus in on these tiny characters or these tiny stories. And then the Marvel movies start. And then we got the Collector shows up. And I was just like, oh my God, if Korvac shows up, I am going to get all these emails from people going, hey, I heard there was an Institute for Korvac Studies.
Well, and Korvac was a major villain in one Jim Shooter story arc that's referred to a lot. And he started out as a random characterless villain in a Defenders annual. He was one of the Grandmaster's pawns fighting the Defender. And Jim Shooter decided, I'm going to use this guy.
Oh, the award was beautiful. It was like the Stanley Cup. You had to bring it back and pass it on the next year. It was the top half of a Ken doll that was attached basically into a box that had been spray painted gold with the Corvi written on it.
Because that's the original Korvac. Yep,
it is, and the same person got runner up every year. That was sort of. But then,
with the comics thing, like my favorite titles in the 70s as a kid, aside from X-Men, which became a big thing and started out not such a big thing. I'm a fan of the Defenders and the Champions more than I was the Avengers or the Justice League. And
Defenders, the also-rans.
Yeah. The Defenders, I mean, the defining quality of the Defenders was like, here's the people nobody else wants on their team. But I love that idea. And part of it just, there was a freedom to that. The writers didn't have to worry about what Nighthawk was doing in his own ongoing title every month because he didn't have one. Whereas, in the Avengers, it was like, oh, wait, what's Cap doing this month? I have to figure all that stuff out. And in Defenders, you could just have, the elf with a gun shooting people and a mystic who gets turned into a goat-headed creature. Just completely absurd stuff. But it felt so open to anything could happen because it didn't matter with these characters. And I kind of love that.
I'm going to say the minor characters that become major characters, which I think is becoming the theme of this conversation. are when an experiment succeeds.
Yeah.
And an artist tries something with the character and it catches on, because I think if we started cataloging the failures, it'd go on forever.
Yeah.
Then a year later, they'd have a Marvel movie because someone would have figured out, hey, we could use this raccoon and it's going to be awesome.
And there is sort of that theory that there are no bad characters if the right person comes around and finds the
Only
right
small
concept.
actors.
Yeah, or small actors. Yeah,
I believe that.
Constantine.
I believe that because we like the characters because of their personality and the story they're in. We don't like Spider-Man because he has a spider's powers.
Yeah,
Like, that's
right.
interesting, but only goes so far. We like Spider-Man because he's this perpetual underdog boy genius who is in this world where he's wisecracking, who goes on adventures.
And also the workers' struggle.
Then when we go through, when these characters are written badly, we get really angry.
The Amazing Spider-Man movie series, for example.
Yeah.
But I think that, like, it's interesting that this conversation has mostly focused on long form novels or series, TV shows, and comic books, because there is that like wide, expansive universe that you can play around with, and we focus less so on movies. And I guess, like, we've mentioned the Marvel movies, but that's
That's
series.
also long form.
Yeah. There's like, are there any like one-off, not even like series like Pirates of the Caribbean, but like one-off movies where a minor character has stuck out to you, or a short story?
Does that to be a movie or is book? Yeah.
Or a book that's not a series? Something like short.
Yeah, because and that's a really valid point, because with all these long form things, minor characters have the opportunity to grow and change in a way they don't in a 2-hour movie.
Particularly with comics where the creative team changes and someone just changed their mind. Like Luke Cage is a big character today because Brian Michael Bendis grew up liking Luke Cage. So once he worked for Marvel, he just put him in literally everything he wrote.
Yeah.
Like it was literally, I'm just dragging him. He's an Avenger now, and he's Jessica Jones's boyfriend, and he's this, just because that was Bendis doing it by himself. But I'm trying to think about, like, there are certainly, I mean, Watson has a lot to do. Well, and there's several novels, but he has a lot to do.
Minor character.
Yeah, he has too much to do. I'm thinking there's got to be things like Tiny Tims of the world who.
Yeah, I'm going to give an example from my childhood. The Howard Powell Robin Hood. I read that in like 3rd grade, 4th grade, or whatever. And there's Robin Hood, and boys love Robin Hood or whatever. My favorite character in the book back then was Will Scarlet. Why? I don't know. He's one of the merry men. He has a long. If you look at the history of the Robin Hood folktales or whatever, and the Morris dancers and all that stuff, Will Scarlet is a long term part of that. But why was he my favorite character? Because it's not like he was mentioned in the Douglas Fairbanks movies. Well, I mean, he has been since. But,
he has been since. But but I don't know.
But he's a minor character.
Name.
Part of it just my hair was much redder as a child, and he was described in that with red hair. And in 4th grade, I was cast as Will Scarlet in the Robin Hood school play because I had red. But he was my favorite character before I was cast in that part. So that's a personal example of here's one that I really dug, and I couldn't tell you why.
So basically, I got one thing from that story, and that thing was that the role you were born to play was Will Scarlet in Robin Hood. But I actually found a old blog post I wrote, and I won't say where because I don't want anyone to read it because it's bad. About how I
link in the show notes.
Okay, go find it. Go find it. I actually don't go dig up my old writing. There's a lot of interesting things that I wrote when I was in college. One of them compared purity rings to alien abductions. Anyway, I'll just let you sit with that. I wrote this post about minor characters being sometimes more interesting than the major characters, and I used the example of Inception. Okay. And Josh and I rewatched it recently, and at this point, Josh is like a minor character on the show, too much. But we watched Inception, and we realized as we watched it, Cillian Murphy plays the target, the guy whose mind they're going to invade, and he does a really good job with like what he's given, and he's a really good actor. So I mean, clearly we talked about like actors and their charisma being part of it. But two, Cillian Murphy's character, because they're going into his mind and to like make the idea that they plant in his mind stick, they have to convince him like through emotion. So the character of Robert Fisher that Murphy plays is actually the only character besides Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Dom, who's the main character, who really gets any sort of backstory or character motivation beyond just like a couple of lines explaining why on earth they're all going along with this heist plan. So like
what you just described, my problem with that movie is I didn't know or care about anybody in that film.
Right. So like the shape of the film and like the arc of like what action happens is all based on what is going on in Robert's mind. So if you don't buy into that kind of like father-son narrative, which is also kind of a pretty typical narrative, see Lost, like every character, they all have daddy issues. See also every book in the world. Like it doesn't work. So anyway, well, I guess what I'm saying is that Inception is really about this very minor character played by, at the time, an actor people did not know as well as almost literally anyone in the cast.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking through my Kindle books. I'm realizing that I read a lot of really obscure shit. And,
that's fine. We should all expand our minds.
yeah, but like I'm just looking at like there's a science fiction writer in the 1950s who I really like, H. Beam Piper, and he killed himself just before giant science fiction boom. And there's people in his like general fans think that he would be talking about him aside Asimov had he lived. And he has a lot of incredibly well-drawn characters.
Is that the guy who did the Fuzzies?
Yeah, he did the Fuzzies.
I knew the name rang a bell. I read those back in the day.
And he did like these massive storylines that they weren't a series, but they all took place in the same future history. And sometimes one would refer to an event that happened hundreds of years before on another planet in another book. And his general concept of what his characters are like and what they were doing, you could meet a character, a very short interaction with them on the journey of the main story, and just feel really good about that character and never see them again and never have to. And I went through a phase when I was an undergrad. I was a double major in English with a minor in dance. And as I think everyone on this panel knows, when you have an English degree, we'll expect you to have read every single book in the world.
Yes.
So I went through a project of where I was going to read everything that I was embarrassed not to have read yet. And like, I think this is an ongoing issue, like, a PhD later and I'm still not there.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember going through one of the differences, and I'm glad we have like English PhDs here with us. One of the differences I noticed between American novels and European novels is in American novels, you're more likely to have disposable characters than European novels. You're more likely to see a minor character come back in some way. Or if you read like Kerouac on the Road, everyone is a one-off.
Well,
everyone's a single
barely
serving.
a book. I love that book, but it's barely a book.
Yeah.
But like, you have single. So do we want to call? I feel like we're having terminology issues.
Yeah.
So are we talking about minor characters as they're in the background? Are we talking about minor characters as single serving characters?
And I think it's a little of both.
Yeah.
I mean, so here's the thing. Like,
there's the line.
Yeah. I don't know that if we take Hamlet, our first example with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, their pure background, they serve a purpose, but not really. You can remove them for the plot and pretty much everything just happens in Hamlet. Do they do any?
You can. They're there for a very specific.
Okay. Yeah.
And you can kind of gloss them, but people cut Hamlet a lot as Hamlet. But they're there for. But if you're talking about back in the day, Shakespeare time, people could have doubled characters, and whoever played Rosencrantz and Guildenstern could have played a bunch of other. They could have been the guards in the beginning. The guards in the beginning of Hamlet, never need to see them again.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
One of the most famous lines in English literature. You never need to see them again.
Well,
I once was an assistant fight choreographer for a production of Hamlet, where when we got to the duel, the character who played Osric was highly sexualized. You probably can't remember who Osric is because you don't need to. Osric is the court functionary who is getting Hamlet ready, summoning Hamlet for the duel. And there's the whole like exchange about why don't you have your hat on? Why are you wearing your hat? Because it's a respect thing. The way that this particular production had it was Osric was the one who was poisoning the blade.
Okay.
And they had Osric, who was played by a young woman. And the poisoning of the blade was this extremely sexual moment where like it was a phallic symbol and no one missed what happened.
Okay. So here's what I'm wondering, though.
Minor character.
If you take so you take that's one extreme. That is a character who background in the original tech, you guys moved it to be a single function character, right? Like you've sort of transformed it by adding to the part, right?
It was a single function character, but yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking the single function characters, even though it's 2 appearances, not just one. Boba Fett in Star Wars. Well, not in in Empire and in Jedi, right?
Yeah.
Like Boba Fett, everybody loved Boba Fett, but he is completely he's just a cool looking guy in a cool looking suit, but serves almost no function to the plot. He pushes a cart and then he dies.
Yeah.
That's all he does in those movies. And people remember him as being much cooler, but he's completely ineffectual in the actual text of those original films. And then that
was about the toys.
It was Lucas liked him. He always wanted to do more with him and he just never got around to it. So I mean, like I'm thinking of characters like that, but then there's also characters where like some of them, like Fonz becomes important because of what you said before. Winkler is just a incredibly charismatic actor and he made him into something. Another one I'm thinking of, I just put up a list of like the random minor characters. The Jesus from The Big Lebowski, he stills the show, but mostly just because the guy is entertaining. He's not supposed to be. And that's there's actually been a sequel that nobody saw, but the original movie was just like, he's just a one-off that was just there to color, the dude's world and say, hey, there are some interesting guys in the dude's, and he's one of them. Like he has no specific plot function.
You watch a movie of him?
Yeah. Well, they made one. I haven't, and it's in my Netflix
movie.
Yeah, it's in my Netflix queue. I haven't watched it yet. I know that it's very queer and people who are big fans of The Big Lebowski. But very, the dude bro fans of The Big Lebowski. I know a lot of them didn't like it.
It's like I'm thinking about Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And that movie was universally panned. Yeah. And I think one of the reviews of it said everyone loves Han Solo and Chewbacca, but you would never give them their own movie.
Well, we did.
Again, we did. And it didn't do that well.
It was painfully boring. I just can't believe you have such a charismatic cast and it goes so wrong. Well, yes, I can.
Also writing and
The Big Lebowski.
One of the things I used to say about the Star Wars prequels is that you managed to make Samuel L. Jackson look bad. And like, I don't know what that took. Like, that's the man who made Snakes on a Plane work.
I mean, Natalie Portman apparently had to have someone else vouch for her acting skills for her to get like roles after Star Wars because
it was so bad.
Yeah, like
just tell them to go watch Professional.
Just as an aside, the Big Lebowski spin-off / sequel came out in 2019. It's called The Jesus Rolls, and John Turturro returns to the role. It currently has a 21% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Still higher than Artemis Fowl, by the way.
Yes, and a 45 on Metacritic.
Also higher than Artemis Fowl.
So I think now the question becomes with something like that is what's the in terms of form and function and story structure, are certain characters perfect as serving characters, and anything beyond that, like a Saturday Night Live sketch that goes on too long?
Maybe. That's cool to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are novels like Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go that take the perspective of someone who's minor or disposable in society. And that works because there's a lot of internalization that's done on purpose. But I mean, there are plenty of things that work with flat characters as the main character. But if you want to break it down to the old flat round character thing, if one character is just vibrating on one frequency, to borrow E.M. Forster's language, like how long can you watch that?
And I agree. And I'm thinking about, when you were saying that, I was thinking about McSweeney's imagined monologue of one of the antelope that's watching presentation of Simba in The Lion King. And it's worth your time. It's a very short read, and I'll see if I could dig up the link. But there's this thing that came out a few years ago where someone wrote a monologue of someone coming to see Simba's birth, and though the king of the Danes summons everyone, and he's going like, "Yeah, I can't wait to tell my wife about this, but Bassa ate her." And like, we don't really hear from any of the antelope in The Lion King, but this was like this in-depth, this is the internal monologue of this background drawing. And, something else that gets really interesting about minor characters, Bertolt Brecht wrote these additional scenes for Romeo and Juliet, for a couple other Shakespeare's. And they're basically the kitchen staff of the manors plotting to overthrow the social order. Going like, yes, the Montagues and the Capulets are having their useless struggle while we in the working class have to just wash more dishes. and like, what's that do? What's that? And,
there's the old joke, the people who work at the cafeteria on the Death Star.
Yeah, it's a big one. And like the thing in the Kevin Smith movies about the independent contractors, the Death Star.
Well, to take Romeo and Juliet though, so has anybody ever read The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet, or is it just me?
No.
Okay, that's
that one's just you.
Yeah, that'd be the narrative poem that Shakespeare adapted into Romeo and Juliet. Because people don't realize it, but William Shakespeare was basically the Kevin Feige of his day. He was just he was making adaptations of stuff. Yeah. So, Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet is a poem written by Arthur Brooke, and in it he tells the story of Romeo and Juliet, who are two teenage children of warring families who they're slightly older. I think they're like 18, 19-ish in the poem, and they meet at a party and fall in love and secretly court each other over a period of, I want to say, 10 or 11 months. It's not quite a year. Shakespeare changed that because he was like, not enough drama, 3 days. Yeah, and that's really what he did. So, but it takes like a whole year in the original poem. And one of the things in that poem is when Romeo first goes to a masked ball for dinner at the Capulet place, he is seated, next to a bunch of strangers. He doesn't know any of them. And throughout the night, they introduce themselves, and one of them is named Mercutio. It is the only time Mercutio's name is mentioned in that poem. It is just, he is a one-off character that is mentioned in one line as, and the dinner party includes, Joe, Bob, Larry, Mercutio, Frank, and, or whatever their names are. Shakespeare liked the name Mercutio and developed him into a significant, frankly, single, as Meron said, single function plot character. Huh?
Serving.
Yeah, single serving plot character for the play that we all know.
I mean, I would debate that he's I would say he's a significant supporting character more than a minor character. Someone like Shakespeare, he also had close working relationships with all his actors. He may have thought like, hey, I really want to write this type of character and I want to write it for this dude. And let's use Mercutio and create the Mercutio character. His name was in the poem anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm still like, I'm scrolling through my Kindle books. I'm just seeing so many. I'm very curious, like what people. I'm thinking a lot about the single serving characters versus other characters. Like a single serving character come in, they do a thing, and they've done the thing, and it's there. And that's very different from waitress.
Yeah, right.
Or the bartender, which could become someone, but often is not. And like thinking of the example of Banshee. Banshee recommended by the man who's going to be a guest on one of the upcoming episodes, but we were joking about this. We said like so the concept of the show for people who don't know, and everyone should watch Banshee, it's insane and ridiculous, is a ex-convict who like shows up at this town looking for his former lover and is there when someone who shows up to become sheriff gets killed, takes over the sheriff's identity and becomes sheriff of the town. Little town in the middle of Pennsylvania, and how everyone there is supermodel hot.
like we are in Pennsylvania.
That's all of Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously.
I lived there for 2 years, and like I never got whatever was in the water. It wasn't on CMU's campus, and
we added it after you left. That's that's why we all look like this now.
And everyone's a ninja. Like everyone is super hot and the ninja in this like little town in the middle of Pennsylvania, and have certain characters who in season one, someone is like just the bartender, someone's just the guard, someone's just this like cop number 3, and some of them are backgrounds that have the potential to become something else.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them become a major character 4 seasons later.
Mm-hmm.
And when is that, hey, they're on the set anyway, let's give them a bigger role? Some of that, I think we start to get into, when is this the pragmatics of film or theater production?
Mm-hmm.
Is the imagination of writers. If you're dealing with Rocket Raccoon is a piece of intellectual property that falls under Marvel's umbrella. And I don't know their pitching process, but someone would have had to say, hey, I want to try telling this kind of story. Instead of creating something new, what if I go into the archives and take this character?
Which is more and more the pattern at Marvel and DC all the time because of copyright issues.
Yeah.
And I think that's the easier way to do.
Yeah.
Versus on an ongoing production, one who's showing up anyway, who the staff realizes, because there's certain shows where you could just tell people are having a fuck ton of fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Magicians, Lucifer. Magicians is another one for single serving characters suddenly being mainstream. Josh is like the big, like, when did Josh become the savior of the universe? Pretty much. Like the magicians, like, and I would venture, because you can tell that they're having the best time of their life, that they were having the best time of their lives working on that show.
Mm-hmm.
And someone noticed, hey, this actor's good to work with. They're here anyway. What if we started doing this with them?
Mm-hmm.
And that's very different than digging into the archives for intellectual property.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, is it very different? I mean, it's sort of.
Yes, because one of them's a person.
That's what I think. I mean, I think there's a different motivation, but I think it's functionally. So in that case,
here's this pre-existing character that we knew nothing about. Let's do something with them. Or
here's my friend who I want to work with, so let's do something with them. I think that in both cases, what you had was the magicians. I think what Josh. I mean, I don't know, but I assume the actor who plays Josh, I assume it went down exactly how you said. I know that's how it went down with Galactica, because I've seen Douglas talk about it in interviews where he's just like, yeah, we just wanted to work with our friends. Kevin Smith writes entire movies around, well, what can I do? What can I throw a part in here just to give my friend something to do, or my kid something to do? So I think there's like a trying to, have a party.
Well, if you work in entertainment, if you work in any kind of live entertainment, sometimes the only way you get to see your friends is if you find ways to work with them.
Right.
Yeah.
So I totally get that. Right. And then I think the same thing happened with like, say, Luke Cage, and when Bendis was writing him, it wasn't so much a friend. It was just here's something I'm interested. I've always loved this character. It's something I like instead of somebody. And unless somebody tells me no, I'm just going to do this. Right. And I think there's what's the Hawkeye story? Who wrote the Avengers Disassembled, Wayne? That horrible.
No, that was Bendis.
That was Bendis. Yeah. And Bendis actually said at some point he kills Hawkeye off in this story because like he needed to sacrifice somebody, so he kills Hawkeye essentially off panel as a plot point. And he said, I never asked anybody. I just don't like Hawkeye, so I killed him.
And when Hawkeye was brought back, it was obvious to me that he still didn't like him, because I really hated the way he wrote the character. But even after that, he even said, I did it because it was 2006 and I needed to kill somebody, and he was convenient to kill. And if I tried to do it in 2009, they never would have let me, because Hawkeye was now the center of the cinematic universe. Yeah. So I think a part of it's just what do you want to do as a creator when the creative staff isn't just one person. That happens. Things float around.
And I think also with I'm thinking too about minor characters or single serving characters in story structure. So much of film is influenced by Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey.
Mm-hmm.
So like no one in anthropology takes him seriously. And there's certain steps in the hero's journey that are like Yoda is the step in the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. Yoda in the original trilogy, we have him for this brief moment. He fulfills his mentor role, and then we only see his ghost once or twice. Yoda's a minor character. People latched onto Yoda because Yoda is the old mentor, grandfather, sensei figure everyone wishes they had. And I think if we saw more of Yoda, we don't see Yoda making breakfast. I think like when we see in the new trilogy, when we see Luke milking the whatever those things were, we thought we were going to see Luke become Yoda. Instead, we see Luke doing chores. Never saw Yoda do chores. One was going to vigorously disagree with me.
Well, I mean, I guess Yoda did not do chores, but he definitely did the opposite of doing chores. And ate Luke's breakfast. I mean, I don't know. I think that maybe, I don't know. Star Wars is a rabbit hole that I don't know if we should go down.
Well, but I don't know if it's just Star Wars. I'm wondering if maybe it's not just Star Wars. Maybe the point here is that the power of the minor character is, we talked about this briefly. Part of it's the mystique. If you know too much about them, then they become a specific individual. But if it,
then they become a main character. Yeah.
Right. If the minor character is, the Mary Sue that you wish you could put in the story, like if the minor character is just somebody where you're like, I'm trying to think. Oh, okay. If the minor character is Neville Longbottom, you know what's great about Neville Longbottom? Neville Longbottom is me being a schlub. I can be in the Harry Potter world and maybe do something useful eventually. That's the dream.
Awesome later.
Yeah. If the minor character is Wedge Antilles from Star Wars, oh my God, I could be a fighter pilot too. You know why? Because I don't know anything about Wedge Antilles, so he's probably not any better than I am.
If you read the expanded universe, you know quite a lot about Wedge Antilles.
But that
right, and then that sucks.
Yeah.
That sucks. I don't want to read the expanded universe. Yeah. I want to believe in this guy who shows up 3 times and lives.
But that's the thing. People will latch onto these characters and make them main characters.
Yeah,
right?
It's good.
When you have something like Star Wars where there's been so much added onto it, everybody, every minor character, every character in Star Wars is a minor character, and every character in Star Wars is a major character, depending on which book you read or game you play.
What about like John Wick? There's a few one-off fights in John Wick are amazing and specific. There's a point where John Wick fights a sumo wrestler, and you think about what it takes to create a sumo wrestler and the amount of training and resources to create that many rice and fish cakes and train someone to become that. And that is a few minutes of screen time. There's less screen time than Darth Maul. We're going to talk about minor characters with massive impact. And you could go through that character's life, but instead it's like, this character is this obstacle in the hero's path, and the hero cannot solve this problem the way they solve other problems because it's a sumo wrestler. And there's several fights that are like that.
And there's sort of the assumption that the sumo wrestler also has a story. We're just not getting to see it.
They have a story because like just who they physically are applies a lifetime of training.
My example for that would be the Komodo warrior from Fury Road, Mad Max Fury Road. For people who don't know, he's the guy with the flaming guitar.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
See, I think Dolph
really cool
Lundgren and Johnny Mnemonic.
So, have we resolved anything?
Yeah, I think we haven't resolved it. I do want to just give a shout out to one of my favorite minor characters in modern fiction. This is the extended Stephen King universe. There's in his world, there's a character by the name of Andy Clutterbuck, who I believe first appears in Cujo. And Andy's just like, it's his first day on the job as deputy. And over the course of the next 30 years, any novel set in the Derry or Castle Rock area, we see Andy as a deputy, and then he becomes sheriff. And then he's just like, we see his career. And then eventually he gets old and retires. There's never a story about Andy Clutterbuck, but Andy is there as part of the police force throughout Stephen King's career. And we see his entire life, and he's never a main character. There's never a story about Andy. So he's one of my favorite minor characters because he serves a purpose.
So we should resolve to read more Stephen King.
Not it.
I don't know that that's a good idea necessarily, but I just he always, when we talk about minor characters, he always comes to my mind of just as a reader of that world and those novels, you're reading along, is like, hey, it's Andy. How you doing? Like, it's an old friend. So anyway, yes, we've resolved nothing.
Okay.
We're all minor characters.
I'm just amazed we got through this entire episode without, because I had resolved myself to not take the conversation there, but I just assumed at some point the conversation would turn into talking about functional characters in comics, specifically women in refrigerators. Because, the classic woman in a refrigerator. That's a separate topic. But that is exactly what this is. Now the problem with those is they're usually not people's favorite, right? Right. Oh, sure. And I think I was just thinking because the classic woman in a refrigerator is Alexandra DeWitt, but most people don't know her name because she was that minor.
Because Kyle gets no love, and I am deeply offended. But whatever.
Yeah.
I'll spare you my rant.
Yeah, definitely a different episode. But I don't know. I think they're interesting. I think it's an interesting concept. I think it's okay to, as we say on so many episodes, like what you like. It's fine,
Yeah.
But I do think it's fascinating that there are characters that so many people glom onto that they become something more. Like I don't think people remember how little the Coma Doof Warrior has to do with that movie. There's barely a plot to Fury Road at all in the first place. There's barely any characterization, and it's one of the best movies ever, right? And then like how little characters like Fonzie do in that first season, and Urkel, God, just takes over that show after being irrelevant, So I don't know. I think it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. And I think everybody has those minor characters that they love.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious to know, if you have thoughts on minor characters, please leave a comment and let us know what you think. Who did we miss? I'm sure people are going to be like, how come they didn't talk about, so-and-so? And I'm like,
well, there's only so much.
There's a lot of minor characters.
Yeah. I feel like you're subtweeting someone right now.
Yeah.
No, literally just everybody. Like those are the kinds of comments we get, and I appreciate them. It's just I don't know. I mean, I didn't think of it.
There are by definition more minor characters than major characters.
Yeah.
Shirts.
Oh yeah, Officer Joe Hansen on the bridge of the Enterprise.
I wanted so much more out of Ensign Rowe, and we didn't get it.
Anyway, thank you to both of our guests, to Nicole and to Meron, for joining us once again.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks
for coming back.
Yeah, thanks, Mav.
Pleasure.
Nicole, anything you want to promote?
The call for papers for pop culture will be on August 1st. So a little early, but we're in Boston next year.
I'm just going to send you the one from last year since we didn't.
And that is absolutely fine.
That might be what I do. I don't know. I have to think about it. Meron, what about you?
My audio drama podcast has had its soft launch.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Slippery Slope.
Yep.
And it is a near future dystopia. And I will send you the link.
Mm-hmm. It'll be linked in the show notes. Palindrome Hannah.
You can follow me on Twitter at Hannah Lee Rogers, but to be fair, there's like nothing on there.
And Wayne.
Don't bother. You know better.
We're all like so active and engaged.
I'm active on Twitter. Well, actually, Twitter. You used to be more active on Twitter than I am, Hannah. But like, you just like you finished, and you're like, I'm done.
The world has changed. I mean,
that's definitely a part of it. Things that I would have been doing and promoting just aren't happening.
There was a time when I would have live tweeted my displeasure with Artemis Fowl line by line, but now this show is my medium of communication. So,
well, speaking of the show, one of the exciting things, and I mentioned this last week on last week's show, but you guys weren't here. We are now on YouTube. You can follow the show on YouTube. So everybody, please go and like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is hit that bell or whatever all those things that people say are on YouTube. Yeah, that's us now. So go do that.
If we get 994 more followers, we might be able to monetize it. So we're almost there.
Yeah,
I think we're up to 983 more or something like that.
Awesome.
So yeah, go subscribe to us on YouTube. That'll be linked in the show note. You can follow me on Twitter at Chris Maverick or on my personal blog at www.chrismaverick.com. You can follow the show on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or apparently YouTube. All of the places, always at Vox Popcast. You can follow the show's blog at www.voxpopcast.com, where we post calls for comments to talk about whatever we're going to be talking about on next week's show. You can give us your thoughts. You can point us in the right directions of things you want to hear us discuss, and we appreciate it. If you like the show, and we certainly hope you do, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or YouTube or wherever the hell else you get podcasts from. And do us a favor. Leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, especially. That helps other people find the show, especially if you don't just rate the show, but you also leave a review. If you write a little something that just tells us what you like about the show, that helps magically. And and I don't really know or care how it works, but it's important and it makes us feel good. We've had a few of those coming in lately. So thank you. And if you haven't written one yet, we'd certainly appreciate it. I would like to thank Maximilian of Thoughtform Music for our epic theme song, building ever so more epically and playing us out. I'd once again like to thank our guests for joining us. I'd like to thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. See ya.
Hey.